Farmer lost everything to ex-husband, even the poor horse. Abigail Jenkins knelt on the dry soil of the ranch where she was born, her fingers trembling as she stroked the mane of Thunder, the horse she had raised since it was a foal. Tears streamed down her sun-tanned face as the court officer checked the papers for the third time, announcing that she had exactly 1 hour to say goodbye to everything before the eviction. Her ex-husband, Richard Harrison, had managed to keep absolutely everything through documents she had signed without reading during their 5 years of marriage. The city businessman, whom she had met at a livestock fair, seemed so different from the caring man who had won her over with promises to help modernize the family property. "You have until 5 in the afternoon, ma'am," said the officer, adjusting his glasses. "After that, any remaining will be considered trespassing." Abigail closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 generations of Jenkins family history crumbling. The 80-acre ranch in rural Kentucky had been built by her grandfather with his own hands, expanded by her father, and maintained by her with as much love as sweat. "Easy, Thunder," she whispered to the horse that was beginning to get restless. "I'll find a way." The animal, a golden-coated quarter horse worth more than $100,000, seemed to understand that something was terribly wrong. Its dark eyes fixed on the unfamiliar men who were measuring the stables and making notes on clipboards. The first big revelation had happened just a week before, when Abigail discovered that the lawyer representing her in the divorce was actually Richard's second cousin. Attorney Robert Harrison had conducted the entire process to favor the ex-husband, making her sign property waivers she would never have accepted if she had known the real meaning. "Mrs. Abigail," called a female voice behind her. It was Sarah Wilson, the veterinarian who had been caring for animals in the region for over 20 years. The woman in her early 50s approached with a syringe in hand, her face filled with sadness. "They brought me to sedate Thunder if he resists transport," explained Sarah, lowering her voice. "But I need to tell you something. I examined the animal yesterday, and it's perfectly healthy. But there's something strange." Abigail stood up, wiping her hands on her worn jeans. "Strange how?" "He won't stop digging in the same spot in the stable. Completely atypical behavior for the breed. It's as if he's protecting something buried there." Abigail's heart raced. Her father always said that horses have a special instinct. They can sense things that humans don't notice. Could it be that Thunder was trying to tell her something? "Attorney Robert assured me that all the documents were in order," murmured Abigail more to herself. "Said I had no choice but to accept the property division." Sarah looked around, making sure no one was listening. "Abigail, my husband has worked at the county clerk's office for 30 years. Yesterday he commented something about irregularities in your property records. I can't give details, but maybe you should find someone you trust to review the whole process. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Abigail slept in the back seat of her Ford Focus 2010, parked on the side of the road leading to the ranch. She had nowhere else to go. Richard had blocked her bank account claiming marital debts, and the few relatives she had left lived too far away. At 2 in the morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, with a voice hoarse from sleep. "Mrs. Abigail? I'm Carl Johnson, the former foreman of the ranch. I heard you were going through some difficulties." Abigail Jenkins sat down immediately. Carl had worked for her father for 15 years, but Richard had fired him right after the marriage, claiming budget cuts. "Mr. Carl, how did you get my number?" "Sarah gave it to me. Look, I know this might sound crazy, but I kept some things that might interest you. Old documents your father asked me to protect." "What kind of documents?" "Original deeds, property blueprints, some contracts showing how the land was acquired. Your father always suspected that someday someone would try to take the ranch from the family." The relief Abigail felt was so intense, she started crying again. For the first time in weeks, a small light of hope shone at the end of the tunnel. "Where can I meet you?" "I work at a ranch 20 kilometers from here. I can bring the papers to town tomorrow morning. Do you have a place to stay?" Abigail looked around the cramped car. "I'll figure something out." The next morning she met Carl in the central square of Riverdale, the small town where she'd grown up. The 60-year-old man, his graying hair hidden under a straw hat, carried a leather briefcase worn by time. "Your father was a man of great vision," said Carl, handing over the documents. "He always said the land should stay in the family, that it was earned through great sacrifice." Abigail opened the briefcase with trembling hands. There were blueprints hand-drawn by her grandfather, contracts for adjacent land purchases, receipts for improvements made to the property over decades. Most importantly, a 1987 deed registered at the county clerk's office, proving the ranch was registered solely in her father's name, long before the marriage to Richard. "This invalidates everything my ex-husband claimed," whispered Abigail, examining the papers. "According to this documentation, he never had any right to anything." Carl nodded gravely. "Your father told me he distrusted Richard's intentions from the start. That's why he kept these documents with me, in case something happened." Abigail took her phone and called the nearest law office. She got an appointment for that afternoon with an attorney named Attorney Jennifer Davis, who specialized in family law. The attorney, a 40-year-old woman with thick-rimmed glasses, examined the documents for over an hour before looking up. "Abigail, these papers prove your ex-husband had no rights to the property. However, there's a serious problem." Abigail's heart sank. "What problem?" "Richard already registered a new deed for the ranch dated 3 years ago, claiming you formed a marital partnership with shared assets. This deed has legal precedence over the documents you brought." "But that's impossible. I never signed anything like that." Attorney Jennifer sighed. "Unfortunately, document forgery is more common than we think. We'll need to prove this deed is fake, and that could take months, maybe years." Abigail left the office feeling worse than when she'd entered. She wandered aimlessly through the streets of the town where she'd grown up, noticing changes she hadn't seen before. Several old shops had closed, replaced by more modern establishments. The bakery where she'd bought bread as a child was now a clothing store. She stopped in front of the county clerk's office where Sarah's husband worked. Maybe it was worth trying to talk to him, even knowing public employees rarely get involved in private matters. Walter Thompson, a short, bald man in his 50s, received Abigail cautiously. It was almost lunchtime and the office was empty. "Look, Abigail, I can't give official information about cases," he said, checking that no one was nearby. "But I can tell you one thing as a neighbor." He leaned over the counter. "Your ex-husband came here about 5 times last year, always accompanied by that lawyer cousin of his. The last time he brought some strange papers with dates that didn't match the stamps." "Strange how?" "The ink on some signatures looked newer than the rest of the document, and there were some erasures that were covered up. But when you've worked with paper as long as I have, you notice these things." Abigail felt her blood boil. "Can you prove this?" Walter shook his head. "Not officially, but there's a new employee, Emma, who made some copies of the documents before filing them. She got suspicious too." "Can I speak with her?" "She only works in the afternoons. She'll be back at 2. Abigail spent the rest of the morning in the square, eating a sandwich she bought at a diner and thinking about Thunder. The horse was supposed to be transported to Richard's property that same day. The thought of seeing him in her ex-husband's hands made her physically sick. At 2 o'clock sharp, she returned to the notary's office. Emma Roberts was a young woman in her 20s, with curly hair tied in a ponytail. When Abigail explained the situation, she looked around nervously. "I can't talk about this here," whispered Emma. "Meet me at the corner diner at 6 when I get off work." The meeting at the diner was revealing. Emma brought a discreet folder with copies of documents. "Look, I could lose my job for this," she said, handing over the papers. "But what I saw isn't right. This document here has 2 of your signatures supposedly made on the same day, but one ink is clearly different from the other." Abigail examined the copies. Indeed, one of the signatures seemed to have been made with a different pen, and the stroke was slightly shaky, as if someone had tried to imitate her handwriting. "There's more," Emma continued. "This paper here was registered as being from 3 years ago, but this type of paper only started being used at the notary's office last year. I know, because I was the one who ordered the new paper." It was the proof Abigail needed. With this evidence, she could legally challenge the fake deed. But there was still a problem. She needed money to hire a good lawyer, and Richard had made sure she had no access to any resources. That night, staying at a cheap motel by the roadside, Abigail received an unexpected call. "Abigail, it's Patricia Jenkins." It was her older sister, who had lived in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. The two had grown apart after their father's estate was divided, when Patricia decided to sell her share of the inheritance to invest in a company that ended up going bankrupt. "Patricia, how did you find out what's happening?" "Richard called me yesterday, offering money for my signature on some documents. He said he needed authorization from all the heirs to sell the ranch. I thought it was strange and decided to look for you." Abigail nearly dropped the phone. "Did you sign anything?" "Of course not. I was suspicious right away. The man was too nervous, offering an absurd amount just for my signature. He gave me 3 days to decide. It was a new twist. If Richard needed Patricia's signature, it meant the fake deed he had registered wasn't enough to sell the property. There was still hope. "Patricia, I need to tell you everything that's happening." Abigail spent the next hour recounting all the details to her sister. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Abigail, I have a confession to make," Patricia said finally. "When I sold my share of the inheritance to you, I didn't actually sell all of it." "What do you mean?" "I kept a small parcel of land, 2 acres at the back of the property. Dad had registered that piece separately, as a kind of emergency reserve. I never told you because I thought it didn't make a difference." Abigail sat on the motel bed, trying to process the information. "This means that... It means I still own part of the ranch. And if that's true, Richard can't sell anything without my authorization. I'll take the first bus there tomorrow morning." The next morning, Abigail woke up with more hope than she had felt in weeks. She met Patricia at the Riverdale bus station. Her sister was thinner and had some gray hairs, but her smile was the same as in childhood. "I brought all the documents I have," said Patricia, hugging Abigail, "and also a surprise." "What surprise?" "My oldest son, Michael, graduated from law school last year. He's interning at a good company in Washington, D.C. He's arriving by bus and will help us for free." Michael Jenkins Williams arrived 2 hours later, a young man of 25, tall and thin, with a confident smile that reminded her of his grandfather. He analyzed all the documents Abigail and Patricia had gathered before giving his opinion. "Aunt Abigail, we have a solid case," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But we'll need more evidence to prove the forgery. And there's something else. Where is Thunder now?" "Richard took him to his ranch on the outskirts of town." Michael smiled. "Then let's go visit him. As part owner of the land where the horse lived, you have the right to check if he's being treated well." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Richard's ranch was 15 kilometers from town, a smaller but more modern property than Abigail's. When they arrived at the main gate, they were met by a suspicious caretaker. "Mr. Richard isn't here," said the man, "and he left orders not to let anyone in." Michael took the lead in the negotiation. "We are legal representatives of the Jenkins family. Mrs. Abigail has rights regarding the animal being kept here. Either you let us in, or we'll come back with a court order." The young attorney's firm tone worked. The caretaker led them to the stables, where they found Thunder in a small, dirty stall, very different from the spacious area he had at the family ranch. "My God," whispered Abigail, seeing the horse's condition. The animal was visibly dejected, with a dull coat and clear signs that he wasn't eating properly. When he heard Abigail's voice, Thunder lifted his head and neighed loudly, as if calling for help. "This is mistreatment," said Patricia, outraged. "This horse is starving." Michael took several photos with his cell phone, documenting the inadequate conditions. Meanwhile, Abigail approached Thunder and noticed something peculiar. The animal kept looking at a specific corner of the stall, making repetitive head movements. "He's trying to show me something," murmured Abigail. The caretaker had stepped away to answer the phone, leaving them alone. Abigail entered the stall and followed Thunder's gaze. In the corner the horse indicated there was a loose board on the floor. When she lifted it, she found a small hole where someone had hidden an object wrapped in plastic. "Guys, look at this," called Abigail, removing the bundle. It was an old digital recorder, the kind reporters use. When Abigail pressed the play button, Richard's voice echoed clearly. "Robert, are you sure she'll sign without reading? Because if she finds out I'm transferring the ranch to my name..." The recording continued for nearly 10 minutes, with Richard and the attorney discussing details about how to deceive Abigail and forge documents. It was exactly the proof they needed. "How did this end up here?" asked Patricia, incredulous. Abigail looked at Thunder, who now seemed calmer. "Someone hid this here, knowing that Thunder would lead me to the right clue. Michael loaded the recording onto the laptop and made several backup copies. With this, we can not only nullify the fake deed, but also sue your ex-husband for forgery and fraud." But the happiness was short-lived. As they were leaving the property, they encountered Richard arriving in a new pickup truck. The 45-year-old man with his gelled graying hair got out of the vehicle with a furious expression. "What are you doing on my property?" he shouted, blocking the way. "This is trespassing." Michael stepped forward, showing an ID. "I'm the attorney for the Jenkins family. We were checking on the condition of the animal that was illegally transferred." "There's nothing illegal. I have all the documents. Abigail signed over the ranch and everything on it." Abigail felt anger rising, but Michael signaled for her to stay calm. "Mr. Richard, we have evidence that the documents were forged. You have the right to hire an attorney because we're suing for fraud and forgery." Richard's face paled. "What evidence? You have nothing." Michael smiled, holding up the digital recorder. "Actually, we have it all recorded. Your conversations with Attorney Robert about how to forge Abigail's signature." Richard tried to lunge for the recorder, but Michael was already handing the device to Patricia, who ran to the car. "You won't be able to prove anything," Richard yelled. "I have a judge and a prosecutor on my contact list." "And we have the law," Michael replied. "Goodbye, Mr. Richard." On the way back to town, Abigail was ecstatic. Finally, they had concrete evidence against her ex-husband. But Michael seemed worried. "Aunt, did you hear what he said about having a judge and prosecutor on his contact list? That could complicate things." "What do you mean?" "If he really has influence in the local judiciary, he might try to interfere with our case. We'll need to be very smart." Patricia suggested they seek help from the local press. If the story gained public attention, it would be harder for Richard to use his influences. The journalist Lucy Carter from the Valley Tribune newspaper was immediately interested in the story. A 30-year-old woman, recently arrived from Los Angeles to cover the countryside, was eager for a story that would make an impact. "This story has all the elements of good investigative journalism," said Lucy, listening to the recording. "Corruption, forgery, abuse of power. With your permission, I'd like to do a series of reports." Abigail agreed immediately. Anything that exposed the truth would be welcome. The first article was published in the Sunday edition of the newspaper titled, "Rancher Denounces Ex-Husband for Document Forgery." The response was bigger than they expected. The story spread through social media and reached the newspapers in the capital. But Richard didn't stand still. On Monday morning, Abigail was surprised with a court summons accusing her of trespassing, slander, and defamation. The lawsuit was being handled by the same judge who had approved the divorce, Judge Harold Williams. "This judge is a personal friend of Richard's," said Michael, reviewing the summons. "They play soccer together at the City Club. We'll have to request recusal." But requesting the recusal of a judge in a small town wasn't a simple task. It meant questioning the integrity of a respected authority in the community, which could cause more problems than solutions. Then something unexpected happened. On Tuesday, Abigail received a call from an unknown number. "Abigail, it's Ethan Harrison. It was Richard's teenage son, 17 years old." Abigail had developed a caring relationship with the boy during the marriage, but they hadn't spoken since the separation. "Ethan, how are you? I need to speak with you in person. It's about my father. There are things you need to know." They met in a square away from the city center, where there was less chance of being seen. Ethan was visibly nervous, constantly looking around. "Abigail, I know my father is doing wrong things," he said, his voice trembling. "I overheard his conversations with Attorney Robert planning how to take the ranch from you." Abigail felt her heart tighten. Ethan had always been a sensitive boy, and being in the middle of that situation must have been very difficult for him. "Ethan, you don't need to get involved in this. It's an adult matter. But I'm already involved, insisted the boy. My father asked me to lie about some dates to say I remembered you signing papers I never saw. And there's one more thing. He pulled a phone from his pocket. I recorded some of my father's conversations without him knowing. There's one that might interest you. The recording was recent, from just 2 days before. In the conversation, Richard was talking to someone about speeding up the sale of the ranch before Abigail could prove the forgery. I need to sell this property quickly to the resort group. If Abigail discovers all the schemes, I'll lose everything, Richard's voice said. Resort? Asked Abigail, confused. It's a huge project, explained Ethan. My father made a deal with some businessman from Atlanta to build a luxury resort on your ranch. He's already received part of the money as a down payment. Everything was starting to make sense. Richard didn't want the ranch to live on or raise horses. He wanted to sell it for a tourism venture that would completely destroy the property's agricultural purpose. Ethan, are you willing to testify about this? The boy hesitated. If necessary, yes. But my father can't find out I was the one who told. He gets very violent when he's upset. Abigail hugged the boy, remembering how he used to help her take care of Thunder when they lived together. We'll protect you, Ethan, I promise. With the new evidence provided by Ethan, Michael requested an urgent hearing with the district attorney's office. Prosecutor Samuel Andrews, a serious man in his 50s, received them on a Thursday afternoon. The case really shows signs of forgery, admitted the prosecutor after analyzing all the evidence. But we have a problem. Judge Harold Williams has already ordered the case to proceed under seal, claiming protection of the parties' privacy. Does that prevent the press from continuing to cover the case? Asked Michael. Exactly. And any new publication could be considered contempt of court. It was a clever move by Richard. Using his influence over the judge, he had managed to silence the press just as public opinion was starting to turn against him. Abigail left the meeting feeling defeated again. Every time it seemed they were making progress, a new obstacle appeared. We can't give up now, said Patricia, trying to cheer up her sister. We have too much evidence not to be able to turn this situation around. But if the judge is on his side, how will we win? Michael was thoughtful. There is a way. We can request the case be transferred to the neighboring county, alleging bias by the judge. With the evidence we have about his friendship with Richard, it's possible we could succeed. That night, Abigail had an idea. She remembered Mrs. Margaret Olivers, a 72-year-old woman who had been a close friend of her parents. The woman knew all the town's secrets and had an impressive memory for dates and events. The next morning, Abigail visited Mrs. Margaret in her simple home in the town centre. The elderly woman received her with a tight hug and freshly brewed coffee. "Lois, my daughter, I've been following your fight through the newspapers," said Mrs. Margaret, pouring coffee into antique porcelain cups. "Your father must be turning in his grave seeing what they're doing with the family property. Mrs. Margaret, do you remember anything strange about the time I married Richard? Any detail that could help?" The elderly lady became thoughtful for a few minutes. "You know, now that you ask, I do remember something. About 2 weeks before the wedding, I saw your father at the courthouse talking with Walter. He was very worried, speaking about protecting the family assets. Did you hear what he said?" "Not everything, but I remember one phrase. If anyone ever tries to take the land from Abigail, they must look for what's kept where Thunder sleeps." At the time, I thought he was talking about hidden money. Abigail's heart raced. Her father had hidden something in Thunder's stable, and she had never properly searched. "Mrs. Margaret, can you testify about this conversation?" "Of course, my daughter. I can even draw a map of where people were standing when I heard that phrase. My memory for these things is still good." Abigail left Mrs. Margaret's house with a new clue and much more hope. If her father had hidden something important in the stable, she needed to find it before it was too late. The problem was that the ranch was now under Richard's complete control, and he had posted guards to prevent anyone from approaching. They would need to find a creative way to enter the property without being detected. Michael suggested using Thunder's story as a pretext. "We can claim the horse is sick and needs specific veterinary care that only Aunt Abigail can provide. It's a solid legal argument. Previous owners have responsibility for the welfare of animals they know intimately. Sarah, the veterinarian, agreed to help. She would prepare a technical report stating that Thunder showed signs of severe stress and depression, conditions that could be fatal if not properly treated. "It's true," said Sarah. "Horses can develop serious problems when separated from their original caretakers. I've seen animals that refused to eat until the person they considered family arrived." The report was filed at the courthouse on Friday morning. Judge Harold Williams, pressured by the technical argument, authorized a supervised 2-hour visit for Abigail to care for the animal. On Saturday morning, Abigail arrived at Richard's property accompanied by Sarah and Michael. Her ex-husband was present, along with 2 private security guards, clearly trying to intimidate the group. "2 hours," said Richard, looking at his watch, "and only to care for the horse. Anything else will be considered a violation of the court order." Abigail nodded and headed to the stable. Thunder neighed loudly when he saw her approaching, clearly happy to see his caretaker again. While Sarah examined the animal, Abigail began discreetly searching for what her father might have hidden. The stable was large, with several stalls and a small storage room in the back. Abigail remembered Mrs. Margaret's words, "Where Thunder sleeps." The horse's favorite stall had always been the left corner one, which caught the morning sun. Examining the stall floor, Abigail noticed that some planks were slightly different from the others. One of them had newer, smaller nails, as if it had been recently removed and replaced. "Michael," she called softly, "can you come here for a minute?" The young attorney approached, pretending to be distracted while checking something on his phone. "See these planks? I think there's something underneath." Michael quickly glanced around. Richard was talking with the guards outside, and Sarah was keeping Thunder distracted with affection. "I'll create a distraction," whispered Michael. "When I get their attention, you check what's under there." Michael left the stable and started an argument about the visiting hours, claiming they needed more time due to technical veterinary treatment issues. While Richard and the security guards focused on the argument, Abigail quickly lifted the loose floorboard. There was a metal box, the kind used to store important documents. Inside were several papers, but one in particular caught her attention. A deed registered at another city's notary office, dated just 1 month before the separation. Abigail quickly read the document and almost shouted with joy. It was a living donation deed where she herself transferred the ranch to a non-profit foundation dedicated to preserving Brazilian horse breeds. The donation had a specific clause. In case of divorce, the property would automatically return to Abigail, preventing any asset division. Her father had devised a perfect plan to protect the ranch, probably with the help of some trusted attorney. Abigail didn't even know she had signed this document, but recognized her own signature. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Abigail hid the deed in her blouse and replaced the floorboard. When Michael and the others returned to the stable, she was petting Thunder normally. "How's the animal?" asked Richard suspiciously. "Better," replied Sarah, "but he'll need regular visits to recover completely." On the way back to town, Abigail showed the document to Michael and Patricia. The young attorney was stunned. "Aunt, this changes everything. If this deed is valid, you never lost ownership of the ranch. Richard had no right to anything from the beginning." "But why didn't my father tell me about this?" Michael examined the document more closely. "Look here," he said, pointing to a specific clause. "The deed would only be valid if you were a victim of attempted misappropriation by the spouse. Your father probably suspected Richard's intentions and created this preventive protection. It was brilliant. Abigail's father had anticipated exactly what would happen and created a perfect legal trap. Richard had spent months forging documents and corrupting people to take ownership of a property that legally could never be his. On Monday, Michael filed a petition presenting the new deed and requesting the immediate annulment of all proceedings related to the ranch. He also requested the case be transferred to another judge, presenting evidence of the friendship between Judge Harold Williams and Richard. The impact was immediate. Judge Harold Williams, seeing he could no longer ignore the evidence, declared himself biased and transferred the case to the neighboring county. The new judge, Judge Claire Martin, was known for her strictness and impartiality. Richard tried one last desperate move. He claimed the discovered deed was also fake and requested a handwriting analysis of all signatures. But this time, he was the one who feared the results. The examinations confirmed that all of Abigail's signatures on the documents found in the stable were authentic, while several signatures on the papers presented by Richard were crude forgeries. Even worse, the police investigation opened following the complaints discovered that Richard and attorney Robert had pulled the same scam on at least 3 other women in the region, always using marriage as a way to appropriate rural properties. During the trial, which took place 2 weeks later, Richard still tried to defend himself by claiming Abigail had consented to all the transfers. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings made by Ethan, Emma's testimony about the irregularities at the notary's office, Mrs. Margaret's statement about the precautions taken by Abigail's father. The most emotional moment was when Ethan took the witness stand. The boy, visibly nervous, confirmed all the conversations he had recorded. "My father always said women were easy to fool because they trusted too much," said Ethan, avoiding looking at Richard. "He taught me this was normal in business, but I knew it was wrong." Judge Claire Martin was relentless in her sentencing. She annulled all the forged documents, ordered the immediate return of the ranch to Abigail, and also ordered Richard to pay substantial compensation for emotional damages. Attorney Robert was suspended from the Bar Association and also faced criminal charges. On a Friday afternoon in September, Abigail finally returned home. The ranch was exactly as she had left it, but now it held an even more special meaning. Thunder greeted her with joyful whinnies, and she spent hours just hugging the horse's neck and talking to him. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured. "You knew Daddy had hidden the salvation of our home right where you slept." Patricia decided to move back to the area, buying a small neighboring property where she planned to open a rural inn. Michael completed his internship and opened a small law office in town, specializing in defending women victims of financial abuse. Ethan began visiting Abigail regularly on weekends. The boy had completely distanced himself from his father after the trial and found refuge at the ranch where he could be himself. Abigail became a sort of surrogate aunt, teaching him how to care for the horses and helping him with his studies. The story gained national attention when Lucy Carter sold the story to a Los Angeles newspaper. The case became an example in law schools about financial abuse and the importance of women knowing their legal rights. Abigail used part of the compensation to modernize the ranch and create an equine therapy program for underprivileged children in the region. She transformed the property into an example of how land can be both productive and socially useful at the same time. 6 months after the trial, Abigail was working on the new project when she received an unexpected visit. It was Sarah, the veterinarian, accompanied by a younger woman. "Abigail, I want to introduce you to my niece, Amanda Parker," said Sarah. "She's going through a situation similar to yours. Her ex-husband is trying to take the store she built by herself." Amanda was a 35-year-old woman with brown hair and frightened eyes. She told her story through tears. She had opened a small women's clothing store that quickly prospered, but her ex-husband claimed he had financially contributed and wanted half the business in the divorce. "The worst part is, I'm afraid he might have forged some deposit slips," said Amanda. "He was always very clever with those kinds of documents." Abigail listened carefully, perfectly remembering the feeling of despair and powerlessness she had experienced months before. "Amanda, you're not alone," said Abigail, taking the woman's hand. "I'll introduce you to my nephew, Michael, and together we'll review every document. We won't let happen to you what almost happened to me." In the following months, Abigail became involved in other similar cases. She discovered that financial abuse was much more common than she had imagined, especially in small towns, where women had less access to information and legal support. With the help of Michael and the support of journalist Lucy Carter, Abigail Jenkins created an informal support group for women in situations of economic vulnerability. The group met at the ranch every 2 weeks, offering everything from legal guidance to emotional support. Ethan, who was now in his senior year of high school, decided that he wanted to study law like Michael. He began helping organize the meetings and discovered a calling to defend people facing injustice. "I want to be like you and Michael," he told Abigail one Sunday afternoon while brushing Thunder. "I want to protect people from folks like my father." Abigail smiled, remembering how life can take unexpected turns. The boy she had raised as a son for 5 years was now on the right side of history, working to undo the damage caused by his own father. 1 year after the trial, Abigail received a registered letter that left her intrigued. It was from a law firm in Atlanta, informing her that she had been awarded a national prize for Rural Woman Entrepreneur of the Year. The award ceremony took place in the state capital, in a luxurious hotel where Abigail initially felt out of place. But when she stepped onto the stage to receive the trophy, she saw in the audience dozens of women who had learned her story and been inspired to fight for their own rights. In her acceptance speech, Abigail spoke about the importance of never giving up and always seeking help when needed. "I've learned that none of us is alone," she said, looking at the crowd. "There's always someone willing to help, always a way out, always hope. The important thing is not to be ashamed to ask for help when we need it." After the ceremony, several women approached her to share their own stories of overcoming adversity. Abigail realized that her case had become a symbol for many people facing similar situations. Back at the ranch, Abigail found a surprise. Thunder was accompanied by a pregnant mare that Patricia had bought as a gift. "I thought it was time for Thunder to have a family," Patricia said, smiling. "And you also need new challenges." The mare, named Hope, gave birth to a healthy foal 3 months later. Abigail decided to name him Revival, symbolizing not just the new beginning of horse breeding at the ranch, but also her own journey of overcoming. The equine therapy program grew and began serving children from across the region. Abigail hired 2 specialized therapists and transformed part of the property into a rehabilitation center recognized by the public health system. Ethan finished high school with the best grades in his class and earned a full scholarship to study law at a federal university. Abigail was moved at the graduation, seeing the boy she had helped raise following the right path. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Ethan said, hugging Abigail after the ceremony. "You taught me that people can change, that they can choose to do good." Michael expanded the office and began working exclusively on cases of domestic and financial abuse. Together with Abigail, he created informational pamphlets that were distributed at health centers and schools, guiding women about their rights. Richard's case became a precedent in the regional courts, cited as an example of how to identify and combat financial abuse. Abigail's ex-husband served 2 years in prison and lost the right to engage in any business activities for 10 years. Attorney Robert was expelled from the Bar Association and also convicted criminally. During the process, it was discovered that he had participated in other similar schemes, always taking advantage of the trust of vulnerable women. Abigail Jenkins' story reached the ears of a television producer who decided to make a documentary about property violence in rural United States. Abigail initially hesitated, but agreed to participate when she realized the educational reach the program could have. The documentary aired on a national network and sparked important discussions about women's rights and family property protection. Abigail received hundreds of letters and messages from women thanking her for bringing to light an issue many faced in silence. 2 years after recovering the ranch, Abigail was organizing the first regional symposium on women and rural property when she received an unexpected call. "Abigail, this is Amanda Parker. Remember me?" It was the woman Sarah had brought to the ranch 2 years earlier. Amanda had not only managed to keep her store, but had expanded the business to other cities. "I want to make you a proposal," said Amanda. "How about we create a formal support network? I have contacts with other businesswomen who've been through similar situations." The idea evolved into creating the Hope Network, a non-governmental organization dedicated to supporting women in situations of economic vulnerability. Abigail was elected founding president, a position she accepted on the condition that the work would be entirely voluntary. The Hope Network grew rapidly, establishing chapters in various towns across rural Kentucky. It offered everything from free legal guidance to professional training courses, always focusing on women's economic independence. The chapter at Abigail's ranch became the most active, holding monthly meetings that gathered up to 50 women. The meetings took place in a renovated barn, decorated with photos of all the women who had managed to overcome their difficulties with the network's help. Thunder, now with some grey hairs in his mane, had become a sort of official mascot for the gatherings. The horse seemed to understand the importance of those moments, remaining calm even with many people present. "It's like he knows he's helping others, just like he helped you," Sarah observed one afternoon, watching Thunder patiently interact with the children who accompanied their mothers to the meetings. Abigail agreed, stroking the neck of the horse that had been crucial in her recovery journey. "He's always been special. Since he was young, he seemed to understand people better than many humans." The success of the Hope Network caught the attention of international organizations. Abigail was invited to speak at a conference on rural women's rights in New York City, her first international trip. At the airport before boarding, Abigail looked back and saw the entire team that had formed around her project. Michael, now a respected lawyer in the region; Patricia, who had turned her into an example of sustainable rural tourism; Ethan, in his second year of law school and already interning at his cousin's office; Amanda, who had become a successful businesswoman and major supporter of the network. 3 years ago I was sleeping in my car, not knowing if I'd get my home back, Abigail reflected. Today I'm traveling to another country to speak about women's rights. Life really takes surprising turns. The speech in New York City was a success. Abigail spoke to an audience of over 300 people, telling her story without omitting the moments of despair and the doubts she faced. "What I learned is that our strength lies in unity," she said, concluding her presentation. "No injustice is too great when we face it together, and there is always a way out." Back in the United States, Abigail found the ranch celebrating. The mare Hope had given birth to another foal, and the equine therapy team was celebrating the full recovery of a child who had arrived at the program unable to walk. "Welcome back," said Patricia, hugging her sister. "We have news. The Hope Network received a large donation from a businesswoman from Los Angeles who learned our story. We can expand to 3 more cities." Abigail smiled, looking around her property. The stables were full of healthy horses, the equine therapy center was running at full capacity, and in the main barn, the next Hope Network meeting was already being prepared. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Abigail said to Patricia. "It's not having recovered the ranch, it's knowing that our struggle has helped other women not go through what I did." That night, Abigail walked to Thunder's stall for the daily conversation they'd had since reuniting. The horse greeted her with a soft whinny as he always did. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered, hugging the animal's neck, "for leading me to what Dad hid, for staying strong when we were apart, for teaching me that hope should never be abandoned." Thunder tilted his head, as if understanding every word. In the corner of the stall, the wooden box where Abigail now kept thank-you letters from the women, helped by the network, remained as a symbol that happy endings are possible, even when all seems lost. The last ray of sunlight illuminated the ranch, highlighting the sign at the property entrance. Hope Ranch, Equine Therapy Center, and headquarters of the Hope Network. It was far more than Abigail had ever dreamed when she was sleeping in her car, thinking she had lost everything. 3 years later, Abigail's story had become a legend in the region. Women from neighboring towns visited the ranch to meet in person the woman who had faced a corruption scheme and won. But Abigail always made sure to clarify that the victory wasn't hers alone. "I couldn't have done anything by myself," she said in her talks. "It took the help of Sarah, Carl, Emma, Mrs. Margaret, Ethan, Michael, Patricia, Lucy. Every person was essential. The lesson is that we should always ask for help and always be willing to help." The Hope Network was already operating in 15 cities and had helped over 200 women recover their assets or maintain their economic independence. The model created by Abigail was being replicated in other states, always with the horse Thunder as a symbol of resilience and hope. Ethan graduated with honors in law and decided to pursue a postgraduate degree in human rights. His final project was on property violence, using Abigail's own case as the main study. "I want my research to help other lawyers identify and combat this type of crime," he said during his thesis defense. "My stepmother taught me that the law should serve to protect the most vulnerable. Michael was elected president of the Regional Bar Association and implemented a free legal assistance program for women victims of domestic and property violence. The program was named Project Thunder, in honor of the horse that helped uncover the truth. Amanda Parker expanded her businesses and became one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the region. She used her influence to preferentially hire women in vulnerable situations, offering not just jobs but training and support to help them achieve total independence. Patricia transformed her rural inn into a model of sustainable tourism, offering authentic countryside living experiences. Part of the profits was donated to the Hope Network, ensuring the financial sustainability of the projects. Sarah specialized in equine therapy and began coordinating the ranch's medical program. She developed innovative techniques that were adopted by rehabilitation centers across the country. Lucy won several journalism awards for her coverage of Abigail's case and specialized in reporting on women's rights. She continued to follow the unfolding story and document the growth of the Hope Network. Mrs. Margaret, despite being 75 years old, became a sort of official advisor to the Hope Network. Her exceptional memory and knowledge of local history were often consulted in complex cases. Emma left the notary's office and graduated from law school, specializing in registration law. She worked with Michael, investigating irregularities in documents, using her experience to identify forgeries. Carl, the former foreman, returned to work at Abigail's ranch as general coordinator. At 65, he found the property to be the perfect place to apply his knowledge and contribute to a larger project. Richard himself, after serving his prison sentence, left the region and was never seen again. Rumors had it that he had tried to pull similar scams in other cities, but his criminal record made new ventures difficult. Attorney Robert lost all his assets in compensation to the victims of his scams and began working as a salesperson in a building materials store. His fall from grace was so great that he became an example of what happens when trust is abused. 5 years after recovering the ranch, Abigail was organizing the first National Rural Women's Fair when she received a call that moved her to tears. "Abigail, this is Isabella Stewart. You don't know me, but I know your story." Isabella was a 22-year-old woman, recently graduated as a veterinarian, who had read about Abigail's case during college. "I'm graduating and wanted to offer my volunteer services for the equine therapy. Your story inspired me to work with animals that help people." Abigail smiled, remembering how her own story had begun with Sarah's help. "Of course, Isabella. We always have room for people who want to help. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you allow it." Isabella became the 5th veterinarian on the team and brought new rehabilitation techniques that further expanded the program's reach. Her youthful energy and updated knowledge complemented Sarah's experience perfectly. The National Rural Women's Fair was an absolute success, bringing together over 1,000 participants from across the United States. Abigail was chosen as the keynote speaker, sharing the stage with other women who had overcome similar obstacles. 5 years ago, I was here in this same area thinking I had lost everything, Abigail told the moved audience. Today, I can say that it was actually the beginning of everything. Sometimes we lose small things to gain big ones. Sometimes we go through hardships to discover our true strength. The speech received a 10-minute standing ovation. At the end of the event, Abigail was approached by national and international journalists interested in learning more details about the Hope Network. An American television producer was so interested in the story that she proposed making a film based on Abigail's life. She accepted on the condition that part of the profits would go toward expanding the Hope Network to other Latin American countries. Thunder, now 15 years old, continued to be the heart of the ranch. Even with his advanced age, he maintained the elegance and intelligence that had always characterized him. He had become a sort of ambassador for equine therapy, being photographed with politicians, artists, and business people who visited the project. "He knows he's famous," Abigail joked. "He always poses for photos as if he understands the importance of the moment." On a particularly beautiful autumn afternoon, Abigail was in the pasture watching Thunder play with the younger foals when her phone rang. It was an international call. "Abigail Jenkins, This is Mary Frances Graham from the Organization of American States. We would like to invite you to become an ambassador for rural women's rights. Abigail nearly dropped the phone. Being an ambassador for the OAS meant international responsibility, constant travel, and the opportunity to bring the Hope Network model to the entire American continent. "It's an honor to receive this invitation," Abigail replied, "but I need a few days to think it over. I have many commitments here in the United States. Of course, the position would allow you to maintain your current activities, just expanding to the international level. We'll be in touch soon." That evening, Abigail discussed the proposal with her team. Everyone was unanimous. She should accept. "Aren't you've already proven you can make a difference in a small town," said Michael. "Imagine what you can do representing women from across the continent." "And we're here to keep everything running," added Patricia. "The ranch is our home. We'll take care of it as you would." Ethan, now in his final year of college, offered to coordinate the Hope Network's activities during Abigail's travels. "I learned everything from you," he said. "It's time to give back all that you taught me." Abigail accepted the ambassador position but set one condition. Thunder should be officially recognized as the international symbol of rural women's rights. The OAS immediately agreed, even creating an official logo with the horse's silhouette. The inauguration ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., with representatives from all American countries in attendance. Abigail took the stage wearing an elegant suit, but didn't forget to mention her humble origins in her speech. "I come from a small ranch in rural United States, where I learned that dignity doesn't depend on how much you have, but on how much you fight for your rights and the rights of others," she told the international audience. After the ceremony, Abigail was approached by dozens of women from various countries, all with similar stories of fighting against property violence. She realized the problem she had faced in the United States was universal, existing from Mexico to Argentina. "Let's create a continental network," Abigail proposed during her first official meeting as ambassador. "Each country will have its own Hope Network hub, adapted to the local reality but connected to the others." The proposal was unanimously approved. In 2 years, the International Hope Network was operating in 12 countries, always using the methodology developed on Abigail's ranch. The film, based on Abigail's story, premiered simultaneously in the United States and the United States, receiving excellent reviews and being nominated for several international awards. The actress chosen to portray Abigail made a point of meeting her personally before filming. "I want to understand not just your story, but your essence," the actress said during her visit to the ranch. "I need to convey the strength you have, but also the humanity." The film was a critical and box office success, but more importantly, it sparked discussions worldwide about property violence and women's rights. Abigail participated in dozens of interviews, always carrying the same message of hope and resistance. Thunder, at 17, began showing signs of old age. Abigail reduced her international travels to spend more time with the horse that had been crucial in her journey. "You deserve to rest now," she would say, stroking the animal's graying mane. "You've helped many people. You've fulfilled your mission." But Thunder had one last contribution to make. A group of researchers from the University of Kentucky was studying equine intelligence and became fascinated by the story of the horse that helped uncover hidden documents. "It's a unique case in scientific literature," explained Professor Rachel Miller. "Documenting Thunder's behavior can help other owners better understand their animals." The study lasted 6 months and confirmed what Abigail had always known. Thunder possessed exceptional emotional intelligence, able to detect changes in human behavior and react protectively. "He literally saved not just you, but indirectly hundreds of other women," concluded the researcher. "He's a remarkable example of the connection between humans and animals." Abigail completed 10 years as an OAS ambassador, a period during which the Hope Network expanded to all countries in the Americas. Over 10,000 women had been directly helped by the network's programs. On the 10th anniversary of the ranch's recovery, Abigail organized a big event to celebrate all the achievements. People came from all over the United States and various American countries, all united by the same fight for justice and dignity. Thunder, now 19 years old, was honored as the most important horse in the history of women's rights. Despite his advanced age, he behaved with complete elegance during the ceremony, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "This horse represents much more than a pet," said Abigail during the main speech. "He represents intuition, protection, resilience. He represents the idea that we are never alone when we fight for justice." During the event, several new projects were announced: a rural university focused on women, an international microcredit fund for rural entrepreneurs, and an exchange program that would allow women from different countries to learn about successful experiences elsewhere. Abigail, at 50 years old, was at the peak of her international influence, but she never forgot her roots. She continued living on the same ranch, personally caring for the horses and holding the bi-weekly meetings of the local Hope Network. "What matters isn't how much you grow, but how much you stay connected to your roots," she said in interviews. "My strength comes from this land, from these horses, from this community." On the last night of the commemorative event, Abigail walked to Thunder's stall for their daily talk. The horse was quieter than usual, but still greeted her affectionately. "Thank you for everything, my friend," she whispered, hugging the animal's neck. "Thanks to you, thousands of women discovered they can fight and win. Thanks to you, we learned that hope should never be abandoned." Thunder lowered his head, gently touching Abigail's face with his muzzle. It was his way of saying he understood, that he was proud of all they had achieved together. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Abigail made the right decisions? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.